just to have a bit of a talk about what we do here at the Walton Centre. And although it's talk about neurosurgery and my personal journey into there, really the focus of this talk is more education and how I think we've really put the Walton Centre on the map and how important it is to do that. Certainly, if you have any questions, be very much welcoming those. You can either put up your hand and ask the question, or you can save it up for the end. Also, if you don't fancy speaking, you can put it into the chat, and Nicola will monitor that, and we can go through those questions. If that's okay, then I will make a start. I'm just going to share my screen, so just let me know that you can. Ooh, can you see my slides? Okay, great. Excellent. Okay, well, we'll make a start. Well, as I said, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll just have a quick chat about my personal role and route through neurosurgery. You can see in the background a long and winding, twisting road, and I think that's quite a good visual summary of my journey. So we're just going to talk about the career path. We're going to talk about educationalism as a add-on that many doctors, many consultants will have as an additional role. We'll talk about the Walton Centre and how we've really made great strides to become a national leader in this and other things. And we'll talk a little bit about the future. So career path, well, it all started here in the middle of the Macclesfield. That's where I grew up and was born and bred, and went to Titherington County High School, a good solid secondary school. People didn't really go to law or medicine from my medical school, and so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But luckily, we had an early computer program where you'd put in your various interests, and it would give you a career. And mine was statistics, which is quite funny considering that's the one area still I struggle. So luckily, I didn't persist with that, but I did enjoy biology. So I asked, what about medicine? Is it something for me? And essentially, I was given a very definite idea that, oh no, medicine's for someone who's playing flute at grade 8 and has done all this kind of voluntary work, and I hadn't done any of those things. And so when I applied, obviously I was rejected from applying to medical school. So when I got my A levels, I did reasonably well. So actually, I thought what I'll do is I'll give it another go. So I took a year out and I went to enter the NHS in 1997 here at Macclesfield District General Hospital. And I worked as a hospital porter, which was a kind of entry-level job, I guess, into healthcare, but an incredibly skilled and varied job. Hospital porters, I mean, you will have seen, are everywhere doing things like delivering and collating the mail, taking pathology to the various labs, moving large bits of equipment, but also dealing with patients. And I think that's what really struck me about what an incredibly skilled job being a hospital porter was, because I'd pick patients up to go for a scan, I'd pick them up to go to theatre, and they would speak to me extensively about what's going on, what they were worried about. And I really realised that a relatively unsung role actually is has a really vital role, and that of kind of communication and being the front face of the hospital. And I think that has not left me. I spent a very hard year there doing lots of walking, but I think I learned a lot of skills, and actually it gave me a real kind of momentum and kind of drive to try to get into medical school and work in hospitals full time. So I dusted off my CV again. This time I had the A levels to get into medical school, still didn't play the flute, and yeah, I was listening to the Spice Girls and Oasis as I was trotting my way around the hospital. But despite all of that improvement, could I be a doctor? No, rejected again. Still, I didn't know really what to do. So what I thought I'd do is do something similar to medicine, and I did a science degree at the wonderful University of Leeds. And actually, it wasn't just a science degree, it was the same as the medical degree. So we studied pathology, microbiology, and I was so driven by this because we were learning with the medical students, and I wanted to become a doctor. And occasionally they would let people doing my medical sciences degree across to do the clinical. There's that beautiful medical and dental building in Leeds. And I did, when I got towards the end of my degree, having scored well and got a first class honours in that, thinking, oh well, they'll welcome me with open arms to transfer into their medical course, won't they? Still don't have any other musical skills, but surely now I've got a track record, haven't I? Could I be a doctor there? No, rejected again. And this to me was really it's quite difficult to continuously have effectively the door slammed, but I did learn, I think, that to make it in any sphere, it's not just medicine, it's not just accountancy or management or whatever, to make it in any sphere, you have to be able to take rejection and to not be successful. And my kids are always telling me, oh, you're a consultant neurosurgeon, oh, how amazing. And I do remind them ad nauseum, as they tell you, about how many times you need to fail to actually succeed. And actually it's the development of what we now call resilience and grit that actually gives you the longevity and the ability to deal with that. Fortunately, Leeds was not my only choice, and I did get into St George's down in London, and this was a graduate entry program. In fact, I was the first set of medical students in the country to do the graduate entry slightly shortened 4-year program, not the 5-year. So I got in there, but having only done a 4-year degree, there was a lot of suspicion. Yeah, you're a qualified doctor, but can you do the job? But when we finally finished that, we showed that the graduate entry program was very similar to the 5-year program, and actually I finished top of the year for that, so it was kind of a good affirmation that the course was doing the job. And so I did a surgical rotation in London, so you can see the hallowed institutes of the Royal London there. I did A&E, the Hammersmith Hospital there to the left where I did cardiac surgery, and St Thomas's where I did plastics and general surgery and orthopedic surgery. And I felt that with that, I could follow my dream of going into neurosurgery, because neurosurgery I did find incredibly interesting as a medical student, and I'd done some additional placements around it. I thought with that and this wonderful surgical rotation, one of the most prestigious ones, that I would of course be welcomed with open arms. So can I do neurosurgery? Predictably, no, you're not allowed. And so again, having faced further knockbacks, I finally did get a job in neurosurgery in King's, and improved and learned some of the skills, and finally got the green light and got into neurosurgery. So this was in 2009. So you can see, I started university in 1997. It was actually 12 years later before I actually managed to get onto the training program. And to train a neurosurgeon, you have to do at least medical school, so that's 4 or 5 years depending on what you've done. Then you have to do 2 basic training years, the foundation years, and then it's an 8-year training program. So I did a bit of a longer route, as you can see. I took a year out, I did a degree, I then did a big surgical rotation, and then only finally did I get that green light. And so I moved back to the Northwest, my homeland, to do my neurosurgical training in Manchester. So you can see the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, the Royal Preston Hospital, and Salford Royal there, where I did my training, and I did my 8 years there, and finally, once you've kind of qualified as a neurosurgeon and passed all the exams, then you do a fellowship year. I did that here at the Walton Centre. I did it here at the Walton Centre because of the fabulous reputation for not just the training, not just the surgical techniques, but actually the culture. And that was a strange thing, that we from the Manchester side would meet the Walton side, and the Walton trainees were so happy and really enjoyed their job and became fulfilled. So I had to get a piece of it. So I came across here, and ultimately there was a consultant job that was given to me, and I put here 20 years, because actually I got my job in 2017, so it's 20 years after I first entered the NHS, I finally managed to get that job as a consultant. And so that was there. So yes, I work here as a consultant neurosurgeon, so I do operations, but throughout all of that training, I really appreciated my teachers. And I always try to give back. I find it enjoyable. And actually, I've just come from a teaching session just now to give this lecture. So it's something that's a huge part of my career. Surgical education, very much, as you can see from the Rembrandt here, was very much a kind of apprenticeship model. So you as a young and enthusiastic medical student would come and listen to the great teacher, and there'll be lots and lots of observation and questions, and you might be lucky enough to be able to get some practice dissecting. But of course, these were cadavers; these were not live patients, to try to practice the surgical skills. And really, the apprenticeship model has persisted in surgery, that surgeons, they read and they do some perhaps dissection, but there's quite a big jump to then operating on patients, and it's a graded exposure, and that's how it has been. However, just like the acquisition of any skill, think of learning to drive a car, there is a learning curve. And compared to how you drive a car now, when you first started out, you're a little bit shaky and were kangarooing that car, weren't you? I certainly was. And so you don't want to be kangarooing with a scalpel, do you? And so there probably was a middle step that was needed within surgery. And the other pressure, apart from being this big jump in responsibility to go from a textbook straight to a patient, was the time it would take. I've already mentioned that neurosurgery is 8 years. It's the longest training in the world for specialist training. And British neurosurgical training, British surgical training is very, very well respected globally because it is so long. However, with the European working time directives that came in, we actually limited the hours, and the reasons to limit the hours were excellent. People were working 80-hour days, 98 days. They had no quality of life. They were tired. They weren't seeing their families. It made sense to reduce it, but it only put more pressure on that jump from that to actually doing the operations. And so there really was a need to improve. So just to go to some of the science of learning, you can see here on this graph that we've got a timeline from beginning to hopefully the end point. And you can see here that the performance goes through recognized stages. So going back to learning to drive a car, you start off not knowing what you don't know in what we would term unconscious incompetence. Now, that's not a patient-safe area to be in, but as we start to watch and learn and actually physically do, we realize what we're good at and we realize what we need help with. So we go into the next stage, which is conscious incompetence. You know what to do, but you can't yet achieve that. And then as you move through the training ranks, you start to become consciously competent. You have to think really hard. Think of perhaps your driving test where you were really, really concentrating on moving that mirror and looking in your side mirrors and reversing around that corner. But you could do it, but it was hard work. You felt exhausted after it. Well, surgery is a lot like that. And then as you get more and more familiar, you get to this unconscious competence where you can do the skill, you can talk, you can train, you can be filmed on the TV, or you can do lots of other things around delivering the safe performance. But obviously, these stages of incompetence is just not acceptable in modern day on real patients. And so it's these areas that we need to have an intervention, not just for patient safety, but also it's quite stressful as a surgeon to not be fully up to speed to do an operation because you don't want to do the wrong thing. And so really in medical education, surgical education, there are no learning curves. We're not allowing surgeons who are untrained or not trained to practice their skill on patients. And so we have this kind of flow diagram, and we want to get through this so we can see that it all begins with well, I've got a pile of books there. It's probably more internet pages now, but there's an academic knowledge to learn, and our students who get into neurosurgery have a proven track record of really working very hard and acquiring that. But that's just knowing. But what we need them to do is not just know how, but to show how and to do. And so to help break down those steps, we've got the benefit of virtual reality, where you're in a safe environment where you can really learn the techniques and learn the anatomy. You can press a reset switch and reset everything and start to get that graded exposure. Then as we move forward, we go into some more high fidelity simulators. We've certainly had this in a few times, the real spine. That is in this case, for a spinal procedure, it has realistic bone, it has realistic nerves, it can even bleed and leak the spinal fluid, it can do everything. We use it in an operating theatre with a stereoscopic microscope. So the fidelity of the simulation is high. And that's important actually, because there's technically having a high fidelity simulation that looks like a human being and acts like a human being, but there's also the non-technical simulation. And so often we'll have an anaesthetist, we'll have the beep, beep, beep of the heart rate. We'll try to make the simulation as high fidelity as possible, because we know that learning in context with all the stresses that you get actually helps embed the learning in that sort of realistic environment. And I think that these first 3 panels we are doing really, really well. I think the final panel is work in progress, artificial reality, where you can see here the surgeons sharing a headset where we overlay the CT scan or the MRI scan onto the patient. For the moment, we don't have 3D headsets. We have TV screens where we can overlay data. But I think in surgical training that when this kit becomes a bit more established, that we will probably be having like head-up displays like pilots do to actually overlay that data, so that we can agree on the anatomy, agree on the course of action, and then deliver that. So technology has made a huge inroads, because all of this technology pretty much is reusable. It's expensive, but you can use it again and again, and it's in a safe space. The learner doesn't feel overly stressed. We're not, cutting into animal models or into real patients. We're learning in this safe environment. So what have we done here at the Walton Centre? Well, the Walton Centre has been fabulous at supporting medical education. Probably one of the biggest kind of textbook academic knowledge things is the Neurosurgical Atlas, which comes out of predictably the US. It's a hugely expensive but incredible resource of surgical videos and lectures, and we are, as far as I'm aware, in the Northwest, the only unit that actually has full access to this. So that's a big investment that the Walton has made in our surgeons in training, but also our medical students also can utilize this resource. And actually, I use this myself, as it is such a wonderful resource. In terms of VR, we have multiple things. This particular VR headset we don't own, we kind of loan it in, but it's quite a nice way, because you can see here the learner is using a kind of a 3D kind of joystick to actually practice doing the operation, and is seeing the operation. I can see the 2D representation on the laptop, and we talk about operations, and we can do some feedback on how it would improve. We do use cadaveric material. That's very, very costly, and the main centre we use, Liverpool University has one, Manchester University has one, and so perhaps once a year, once every couple of years, we will have cadaveric, but that's been largely replaced because of the expense and because of other factors by more kind of digital learning solutions. The models we do get in, they are very, very expensive, and actually we looked at industry. There's this one particular company that actually has a mobile bus that comes and unfolds like one of those sort of fancy caravans, and actually has lots of surgical equipment. And so we've had this bus in perhaps, I don't know, every year for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a great resource to have, and we're kind of not footing the entire bill ourselves. We're reaching out to industry. So the Walton Centre, I think you could argue, is at the leading edge of many of those basic areas. What about that transition of the sort of high fidelity simulation? Well, you may have seen our website. You may have seen even the Granada news. We've actually got, and we are the only unit in the entire UK to have this, we've actually got the most cutting edge surgical simulator made by a Canadian flight simulator company. They make flight simulators, and they've branched out into medical, and they've produced this Neuro VR, which is, it is, as things stand, the state of the art 3D interactive haptic feedback, all singing, all dancing simulator. And we can simulate many cranial operations, from diverting the brain fluid to taking out brain tumors, to spinal conditions, and to getting basic kind of skills there, clipping and cutting away and opening up tissues. And it is really, really incredible. I would do the video, but videos don't work very well on Teams calls. But it's really wonderful. It has that background side effects. It has the tissue that can bleed, and can give you a very, very realistic representation. So we use this quite extensively. It didn't come for free. It was a hugely expensive piece of kit. £130,000 is what the Canadians wanted for this. Now that is a lot of money by anyone's terms, but we are incredibly lucky to have a very active charity, and in particular the Jan Fairclough charity raised the vast majority of this through their charity ball. They run it every year as a fundraising for various bits of equipment, and I think back in 2021 is when we had the fundraiser for this, and actually you can see the pictures of the ball there. That raised a lot of money and actually enabled us to buy this very high fidelity bit of kit. So what have we done with the NeuroVR? Well, we have used it for medical students. So we get perhaps 400 medical students through this every single year. We've used it for our own surgical trainees, of which there's about 20 or so, but also we've used it on regional courses for various surgical training. Other regional and the neurosurgical trainees have come across to use it. We've used it on national courses also. So we've had medical students and junior doctors come from across the country to the Walton Centre, and as part of it, they've used this simulator. So it's getting a lot of traffic, and as it's the only one in the UK, it is a really wonderful resource that we are so lucky to have. So I've done a lot of talk up. That's our sim lab, or at least it was. We are maybe having to move homes quite soon, but we can see the Neuro VR there. We can see we've got an operating microscope, which is a super useful tool to give stereoscopic vision to allow practice. And you can see here we've even had the Metro Mayor come along and have a go of our simulator. And this really, I think, fulfills probably that final step between the patients and the surgeons in training, that they're able to practice in full several of the operations before they actually do it in a supervised manner by consultants. And as I mentioned, we've gone national. We run 3 national courses now from the Walton Centre. The Neuro Skills Workshop is more for medical students and junior doctors, which is run out of the Walton Centre, involves lots of education, including the simulator. I also run the Liverpool Neurosurgery Masterclass, which is a national twice yearly course designed for the neurosurgeons at the very end of their training to pass the very difficult and expensive FRCS exam to become fellows of the Royal College of Surgeons. They have to sit some fiendish quizzes and exams, and this that we run, very much supported by the Walton Centre, has taken flight, and we're running the next one at the end of this month actually, and we have 20 to 30, which is a big percentage, about a tenth of the entire neurosurgical workforce, come here to do this program. There is no other provider in the UK of this sort of comprehensive training. And the other thing, but wait, there's more. The other thing that we are also doing at the Walton Centre is I've just been appointed the National Director for Neurosurgical Training Online. And so this GAIN program, which is Great Britain and Ireland neurosurgery, will be a monthly program run by myself and the Walton Centre, covering the entire neurosurgical curriculum, not for the people just about sitting the exam at the end of training, but actually for trainees entering day one into neurosurgery. And over those subsequent 8 years or so, this program will hopefully cover the course. So really, the Walton Centre is genuinely a national hub for neurosurgical education, and it hasn't happened by accident. There's been an absolute support and intention for us to be able to propagate our excellence in education, in neurosurgery, and to disseminate it. And so I'm very proud of those achievements that we've made. So what's the future? Could we do any more? Well, of course, there's more. We are about to start receiving medical students from Edge Hill University. You may have heard that Edge Hill now have a medical school, and so we are the obvious partner for them, as we, as Nicola was saying, cover such a huge area, 3.5 million population, including the lower kind of Lancashire area. And so we're starting to receive medical students from the Edge Hill Medical School, and the symbol below it is Chester, because Chester University also has a medical school that's going to be coming online, and we're already in early discussions about bringing the Chester medical students here as well to really propagate our good practice. What about the fancy headsets? That's work in progress. They are hugely expensive, but I think that's probably the next thing on our hit list, to be able to bring the simulation to live patients and to overlay data. And I think that this will be sort of the final piece of the puzzle to get this kind of wraparound safety through surgical training. And I do believe in the future that these overlaid head-up displays may become standard practice in surgery. But we'll have to see, and then see if I can get one of those Apple headsets. But they're not cheap. Good. So I think in conclusion, we've talked a little bit about my pathway into neurosurgery, which was the scenic route. It took a bit of grit, determination, and what we nowadays call resilience and drive. But actually, those knockbacks actually, I think, set me up to really want to work hard and to understand my subject. And I think that actually has been very useful to go into my education career. I think that education within medicine and within surgery perhaps has been slightly undervalued compared to research. But actually, we recognise with those time pressures, with the pressures that we don't want to have learning curves on real patients, that actually we need to step it up, use technology, and really create a surgical education that's viable and fit for purpose for modern surgery. And I think that we've demonstrated here at the Walton Centre we are one of the leading lights in national neurosurgical education. I think that's fair to say with those 3 national courses. However, is there still role for lectures? Well, of course there is, and obviously we're not just all about the computer games. We do old-fashioned teaching, and we don't denigrate the powers of lectures and textbook works. But we are very much more in a multimodal teaching techniques. And yeah, Walton Centre for undergrad and for postgraduate education really is in a very good place. And yeah, in terms of me, I've not done this by myself. I've done this with a huge amount of support. So we've got the medical undergrad department, Liz Doherty. We've got the and others. I don't want to leave anyone out. We've got Reese Davies, who's the Director of Medical Education, who's been instrumental into this. We've got our fantastic charity that have managed to support us and to push this through. And I'm also surrounded by many other consultants who've been really active in the education sphere. So yeah, I've got a wonderful team that's around me. Good. So I think that was probably everything that I wanted to say about my journey, about education, and about where we are at the Walton Centre. And so now would be a good time if anyone has any questions or any clarifications they'd like to make. Anyone? Or have I been rejected?
No, you've not been rejected. I think Paul has got his hand up, and then David.
Hi, Nick.
Hi.
So as one of your patients, listening to your presentation there was really inspiring, particularly with your experience as a hospital, working, as a hospital porter for a year, and then ending up as a neurosurgeon. It's all inspiring stuff. I was looking forward to hearing about what you've been doing overseas, particularly in San Francisco. What took you over to San Francisco? Was it an offer to go over there, or was it again your appetite for sort of knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, often we think about the US healthcare systems. They often have the image of being, the best of the best, and certainly they're very well financed. And so, as part of my training, yeah, I wanted to go out to see one of the leaders in neuro-oncology, and so I actually won a prize for an educational project as it happens, and so I used some of the proceeds of that to go out and visit Mitch Berger, who's one of the world leaders in cranial tumors. And so I went out there to work with him and to just watch and understand how they do it. And what was very interesting about that placement is the surgery in UCSF in San Francisco is almost exactly the same as the surgery that you would get here in the Walton Centre, or you'd get in London, or you'd get in any other country. The surgery is the same. What was really notable is the amount of money and resources they put into education. And what I was absolutely amazed about is the amount of training and the amount of knowledge that that they put in that. And that actually, for me, set a kind of a wake-up call that actually there's so much more that can be done. And obviously, you know, we're not as resourced as some of these big American privately funded education institutes, but there's so much more that we can do. But actually to have that global kind of exemplar, and that I guess has inspired us here to try and do some of the same things, and really to try to up our game, to run the national courses, to get in the simulators, and really try to become this kind of beacon. And I think that we're kind of getting there. I genuinely do.
Thanks.
And then I think we've got a question from David.
Hi, Nick. I'm David Kane. One thing that really encouraged me, I was the founder chief executive of the Walton Centre back in 1991, and currently I'm chairman of the Pain Relief Foundation, who are a valued partner. I was really interested to hear all the work you're doing on the education side, and think your conversation with colleagues like Manohar Sharma and others could bring some further collaboration. And we're a funding charity and have open ears to conversations about how we can add value to the work that you and others are doing, and collaborate with your own charity at the Walton Centre. So really encouraged. And I think the gentleman before talked about resilience. I love the story. As a long-time governor of schools, it really encouraged me to think, you know, that will to get on. My question, just to give one, is about your mentorship. Because when you're a new consultant, it can be a scary ride. I'm sure you've had days when you've had your tummy's turned over. Who did you turn to for that sort of help on the early years? Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a very good question. And I think in any job, colleagues who've been there, who physically walked that path and had that problem or that incident, are gold dust, and they are the best people to speak to. And so my mentor really was Martin Wilby and Simon Clark. They were the two consultants who I worked with as a fellow, and so they were my natural kind of outlets. But actually, going back to one of the things that really attracted me to the Walton, the culture here. I mean, obviously, nothing's absolutely perfect, but the culture here is really fantastic compared to many other surgical centres that I've worked in, where there can be personalities and there can be disagreements. The culture here pretty much is really quite uniquely friendly, and I think it's that kind of small town versus big city. I think that you see lots of people, you see them regularly, and I think that friendly atmosphere was hugely useful. And yeah, you're right, I've felt sick with anxiety and nerves over if something happens or doesn't go quite according to plan, or if there's a complication, and so that mentorship, I think, is what gives you the longevity. And going back to the original thing, yeah, grit and determination, that things aren't always easy, but we have to kind of persist and hopefully get there.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you.
We've got not a question so much, but I don't know whether let me just see who commented. Kate, is Kate still on the call? It wasn't a question as much, it was a comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes.
We can hear you, Kate.
Yeah, I didn't really have anything else to add, I guess, other than what I said. But yeah, thank you for sharing your story. It's really, really great to hear from my point of view. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. I'm glad it's been of some help. It's it's difficult to know how to pitch this, but I think that hopefully that's giving you a little bit of background of me. And there are obviously lots of other interesting stories from my other colleagues who I work with, but yeah, no, thank you.
If no one else has any questions, Nick, I'd just like to say thanks as well for the ones that are on the call, the members and governors that we've got. This is the first kind of, or it's a different approach to doing a virtual event where people can try and maybe get to know the staff a little bit more and know about where they came from and where they started. It's things that you just don't generally get to know on a day-to-day basis. So for me, even I found it really interesting. I didn't know that you started off as a porter. You know, so
yeah.
it's really interesting.
Oh, well, thank you, Nicola. Thank you for arranging it. Very enjoyable.
My pleasure.
And thank you everyone for your questions and your patience about listening to me drone on about myself. But it was very cathartic for me, so thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Just before we go, I just want to let everyone know that's on the call is I will go ahead and send you an electronic feedback form. Just takes a couple of minutes to fill in, and it does help me then, you know, decide on, you know, what future events that we can plan, you know, what works well, what doesn't. So I would be grateful if you could fill it in and return it. And I've tried to make it a little bit easier by moving to being electronic on last month's suggestion by one of our members. So yeah, hopefully that'll work well. But Nick, thanks again. And hopefully we'll see everyone else at a future virtual event.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Pleasure.